It is the dawn of July 17, 1944, in the hedgerows of Normandy, France. American soldiers crouch low in the dirt as they face an entrenched enemy hidden deep within the thick vegetation. Conventional explosives have failed to dislodge the stubborn defenders from their fortified positions. The air is thick with the scent of cordite and damp earth as the tension mounts to a breaking point. A specialized tank rolls forward with a strange nozzle mounted on its turret instead of a standard cannon. A sudden burst of liquid fire erupts from the vehicle and arcs through the air like a dragon breath. The sticky substance clings to the dense foliage and ignites with a terrifying ferocity that consumes everything in its path. The introduction of this fearsome new weapon marked a turning point in modern combat tactics during the middle of the 20th century. Military commanders sought a solution to the problem of engaging enemies in fortified bunkers and dense jungles where bullets and shrapnel lost their effectiveness. The United States needed a substance that could burn hotter and longer than gasoline while sticking to targets upon impact. The scarcity of natural rubber during World War II created a desperate need for a synthetic alternative to thickened fuel for flamethrowers and incendiary bombs. The fate of thousands of soldiers in the Pacific and European theaters hung in the balance as scientists raced against time to develop a chemical agent that could alter the course of the war. Enter Louis Fieser, a brilliant organic chemist and professor at Harvard University, who accepted the challenge to create this volatile substance. He was a man of science, dedicated to solving complex chemical puzzles within the walls of his laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Fieser worked tirelessly with his team of researchers to manipulate molecular structures and test various compounds. He was not a soldier on the front lines, but his mind was his weapon in this global conflict. His goal was to find a way to gel gasoline using readily available raw materials that were not subject to wartime shortages. The pressure was immense as the Department of War demanded results that could be deployed immediately to the battlefield. The question that haunted the military leadership was whether a simple chemical mixture could truly change the face of warfare. Could a sticky gel provide the tactical advantage needed to overcome the fanatical resistance of the Imperial Japanese Army in the Pacific Islands? Critics wondered if the substance would be stable enough for transport and safe enough for soldiers to handle in the chaos of combat. There were also silent concerns about the ethical implications of unleashing a weapon designed to cause such indiscriminate destruction. The answer to these questions would soon be written in smoke and ash across the skylines of enemy cities. The world waited with bated breath to see if this invention would bring victory or merely escalate the horror. The reveal came with the successful synthesis of a brown powder that mixed with gasoline to form a thick jelly-like substance. The name of this new creation was derived from its two primary constituents, which were naphthenic acid and palmitic acid. This combination was christened napalm, and it exceeded all expectations during initial field tests. It burned slowly and adhered to surfaces with a tenacity that water could not extinguish. The immediate aftermath of its deployment proved its devastating effectiveness as it cleared bunkers and caves that had previously been impregnable. This scientific breakthrough provided the United States military with a terrifying new capability that would define the remainder of the conflict and echo through decades of future wars. The development of napalm began in a secret outdoor laboratory located on the soccer fields of Harvard University behind the business school. Louis Fieser and his associates conducted experiments in open-air trenches to test the burning properties of their new gel. They filled large pits with wood and debris to simulate enemy structures and fortifications. The team watched with analytical detachment as the substance ignited and burned with an intense heat that warped metal and reduced timber to ash. These early tests were conducted under tight security to prevent enemy spies from learning about the project. The contrast between the peaceful academic setting and the destructive potential of their research was a stark reminder of the total mobilization of society for war. Once the formula was perfected, the United States government moved quickly to mass-produce the thickening agent. Chemical plants across the country were retrofitted to manufacture the brown powder in vast quantities. The logistics of transporting the raw materials to the front lines involved a complex network of trains and cargo ships. Soldiers in the field were taught how to mix the powder with gasoline in the field to create the fuel for their flamethrowers. This ease of preparation made napalm a versatile tool for infantry units operating in remote locations. The industrial might of America was fully engaged in ensuring that every flamethrower and incendiary bomb was supplied with this new liquid fire. The first major combat use of napalm occurred in the Pacific Theater, where the geography presented unique challenges. The island-hopping campaign required Marines to dislodge Japanese defenders from deep limestone caves and reinforced concrete bunkers. Traditional grenades and artillery fire often failed to penetrate these defenses. Flamethrowers fueled by napalm allowed American troops to project fire around corners and into deep recesses. The psychological impact on the enemy was just as significant as the physical destruction. The mere sight of a flamethrower operator moving into position was often enough to cause panic among the defenders. This weapon became a symbol of the terrifying close-quarters combat that defined the battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Aerial warfare also underwent a dramatic transformation with the introduction of napalm-filled incendiary bombs. The United States Army Air Forces developed the M69 bomb, which was a canister designed to release clusters of incendiary submunitions. These bombs were specifically engineered to penetrate the roofs of wooden structures common in Japanese cities. When the clusters detonated, they scattered burning gel over a wide area, starting uncontrollable fires. The strategy shifted from precision bombing of military targets to area bombing, designed to cripple the industrial capacity and morale of the enemy. This escalation in tactics led to some of the most destructive air raids in human history. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9, 1945, stands as the single most destructive bombing raid in history. Hundreds of B-29 Superfortress bombers flew low over the Japanese capital to deliver their payload of napalm. The wooden architecture of the city, combined with high winds, created a firestorm that consumed 16 square miles of the metropolis. The heat was so intense that it boiled the water in the canals and ignited structures without direct contact. This event demonstrated the sheer apocalyptic power of napalm when used on a massive scale. The strategic bombing campaign continued until the end of the war, leaving dozens of Japanese cities in ruins. Following the surrender of Japan and the end of World War II, the use of napalm did not cease. The onset of the Cold War brought new conflicts where the incendiary weapon would again be called upon. The Korean War, which began in 1950, saw the United States Air Force drop more napalm than was used in the entire Pacific campaign of the previous war. American pilots targeted North Korean supply lines and troop concentrations in the rugged mountainous terrain. The weapon was seen as a necessary tool to halt the advance of communist forces. It was during this conflict that the term napalm began to enter the public consciousness as a standard element of modern military terminology. The Battle of Outpost Harry in June 1953 serves as a prime example of napalm usage in defensive operations during the Korean War. Chinese forces launched wave after wave of attacks against a small hill held by American and Greek soldiers. The defenders were vastly outnumbered and faced the prospect of being overrun. United States aircraft dropped tons of napalm on the slopes of the hill to break the human waves of attackers. The wall of fire created a barrier that the enemy could not cross, allowing the defenders to hold their position. This engagement highlighted the tactical utility of napalm in close support missions, where precision was required to avoid hitting friendly troops. Despite its military effectiveness, the moral questions surrounding napalm began to gain traction during the post-war years. The indiscriminate nature of fire did not distinguish between a combatant and a civilian. Reports of collateral damage in Korea began to circulate in newspapers and magazines. However, the patriotic fervor of the time and the threat of global communism largely suppressed widespread public dissent. The weapon was viewed by the majority of the American public as a grim necessity in the fight against tyranny. It would take another war in a different part of the world to fully ignite the controversy that would forever tarnish the reputation of this incendiary agent. The Vietnam War introduced a new generation of Americans to the horrors of napalm through the medium of television. This was the first conflict to be broadcast nightly into the living rooms of the United States. Viewers watched in color as fighter jets dropped silver canisters that tumbled through the sky before exploding into rolling balls of orange flame. The lush green jungles of Vietnam were turned into blackened wastelands in a matter of seconds. The visual impact of these strikes was undeniable and visceral. Napalm became a visual shorthand for the destructive power of the American military machine in Southeast Asia. The chemical composition of napalm was updated during the Vietnam era to a new mixture known as Napalm B. This new version used polystyrene and benzene to create a gel that was even stickier and burned for a longer duration than the original formula. It was also safer to handle and less likely to ignite accidentally. The increased burn time meant that it inflicted even more severe damage to targets. Napalm B could burn for up to 10 minutes, whereas the original formula often burned out in less than 30 seconds. This technological improvement made the weapon more effective for the military, but also more horrific for those on the receiving end. Dow Chemical Company became the primary manufacturer of Napalm B for the United States military during the Vietnam War. The company was based in Midland, Michigan, and had a long history of producing consumer goods. Their involvement in the production of the incendiary weapon made them a target for the growing anti-war movement. Student activists and peace groups began to protest on college campuses where Dow recruiters were present. The company argued that they were simply fulfilling a government contract and supporting the troops. This clash between corporate responsibility and moral objection became a defining feature of the domestic turmoil in the late 1960s. Protests against Dow Chemical spread across the nation and became a focal point for the New Left movement. Demonstrators blocked the entrances to chemical plants and held sit-ins at university administration buildings. The slogan "Thou shalt not kill" appeared on placards and banners at rallies from Berkeley to Columbia. These protests forced the American public to confront the source of the weapons being used in their name. The controversy damaged the public image of Dow Chemical and forced other corporations to reconsider their involvement in defense contracts. It was a pivotal moment where the supply chain of war became a battlefield of public opinion. The tactical use of napalm in Vietnam was primarily intended to destroy jungle cover used by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. The thick canopy of the rainforest made it difficult for American troops to locate and engage the enemy. Defoliation and incineration were seen as the only ways to deny the enemy their sanctuary. Massive airstrikes were coordinated to clear landing zones for helicopters and to expose supply trails. The environmental impact of this strategy was devastating, as vast swathes of forest were reduced to ash. The scars on the landscape would take decades to heal long after the last helicopter had departed. One specific incident in June 1972 changed the global perception of napalm forever. A South Vietnamese pilot accidentally dropped napalm on the village of Trang Bang, which was occupied by civilians. Associated Press photographer Nick Ut captured an image of a young girl named Phan Thai Kim Phuc running down the road. The photograph showed the raw terror and pain of the innocent victims of war. This single image stripped away the abstract military terminology and revealed the human cost of the weapon. It appeared on the front pages of newspapers around the world and shocked the conscience of humanity. The photograph, titled "The Terror of War," became one of the most famous images of the 20th century. It galvanized the anti-war movement and increased pressure on the United States government to end its involvement in Vietnam. President Richard Nixon privately questioned the authenticity of the photo, but its impact was irreversible. The image of the girl running from the smoke became a symbol of the failure of American policy. It demonstrated that superior firepower could not win a war if it cost the nation its moral standing. The cultural legacy of napalm was now inextricably linked to the suffering of children. Following the end of the Vietnam War, international efforts began to restrict the use of incendiary weapons. The United Nations held conferences to discuss the humanitarian implications of napalm and similar substances. Legal experts and human rights advocates argued that the suffering caused by fire weapons was excessive and cruel. They sought to establish new protocols that would protect civilians from the horrors witnessed in Southeast Asia. The United States was initially resistant to these changes, as military leaders argued that napalm was a necessary tool for national defense. The diplomatic struggle over the legality of incendiary weapons continued for several years. In 1980, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons was adopted by the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. Protocol 3 of this convention specifically restricted the use of incendiary weapons. It prohibited the use of air-delivered incendiaries against military objectives located within a concentration of civilians. The protocol also banned the use of these weapons to destroy forests or other plant cover, unless the vegetation was being used to conceal combatants. This was a significant step forward in international humanitarian law. However, the United States did not ratify this protocol, immediately citing the need to retain tactical options. The United States eventually ratified the convention in 2009 under the administration of President Barack Obama. However, the ratification came with a reservation that allowed the United States to use incendiary weapons if it was judged to save civilian lives by causing fewer casualties than alternative weapons. This caveat maintained a legal gray area that allowed for the continued possession of napalm like munitions. The military had largely phased out the specific mixture, known as Napalm B, in favor of other incendiary agents. The Mark 77 bomb, which uses a kerosene-based fuel, is the modern successor to the napalm canisters of the Vietnam era. The legacy of napalm extends beyond the battlefield and into the realm of popular culture. The smell of napalm in the morning became an iconic line from the film Apocalypse Now. This movie, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, captured the surreal and nightmarish quality of the Vietnam War. The scene featuring the helicopter attack set to the music of Wagner immortalized the destructive power of the weapon. Films and literature have used napalm as a metaphor for the loss of innocence and the brutality of modern combat. These cultural representations have kept the memory of the weapon alive for generations who never witnessed the war. The physical and psychological scars of napalm survivors remain visible to this day. Kim Phuc, the girl from the famous photograph, survived her injuries after undergoing 17 surgeries. She defected to Canada and became a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador dedicated to peace and reconciliation. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable trauma. Many other survivors in Vietnam and Korea continue to live with the disfigurement and pain caused by the burns. Their presence serves as a living reminder of the long-term consequences of using such volatile chemical agents. The environmental impact of napalm usage in Vietnam is another lasting legacy of the conflict. The intense heat of the fires destroyed the topsoil and altered the chemical composition of the land. Areas that were once dense jungle were left vulnerable to erosion and invasive species. The destruction of the mangrove forests in the Mekong Delta had severe effects on the local ecosystem and fisheries. Efforts to reforest these areas have met with mixed success due to the degradation of the soil. The ecological footprint of the war demonstrates how military technology can permanently alter the natural world. The scientific community also faced a reckoning regarding their role in the development of napalm. Louis Fieser, the inventor of the substance, faced criticism from his peers and the public later in his life. He maintained that he was a scientist doing his duty for his country during a time of global crisis. He argued that he could not be held responsible for how the military chose to use his invention. This debate highlights the ethical dilemma faced by scientists working on dual-use technologies. The question of culpability remains a topic of discussion in ethics classes and scientific journals. The use of incendiary weapons in modern conflicts continues to spark controversy and condemnation. Reports of white phosphorus and other burning agents being used in the Middle East have drawn comparisons to the napalm of the 20th century. Human rights organizations monitor conflict zones for evidence of these banned or restricted weapons. The international community remains vigilant against the normalization of fire as a weapon of war. The lessons learned from the history of napalm serve as a warning against the slide into barbarism. The vigilance of the global public is the primary barrier against a return to the unrestricted use of incendiaries. The strategic utility of fire in warfare is undeniable, but its cost is measured in human suffering. Military planners must constantly weigh the tactical benefits against the potential for collateral damage and political blowback. The evolution of precision-guided munitions has reduced the need for area denial weapons like napalm. Modern warfare emphasizes surgical strikes and minimal civilian casualties. However, the temptation to use overwhelming force remains a constant factor in military doctrine. The history of napalm is a case study in how a tactical innovation can become a strategic liability. The story of napalm is also a story of the relationship between industry and the military-industrial complex. The mobilization of private corporations to produce weapons of mass destruction created a powerful economic engine. The profits generated from defense contracts created a dependency that is difficult to break. The protests against Dow Chemical were an early attempt to disrupt this relationship. The entanglement of civilian industry with military objectives remains a defining feature of the American economy. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to understanding the persistence of controversial weapon systems. As we look back at the 20th century, napalm stands out as a symbol of the industrialization of death. It represents the application of scientific progress to the ancient art of killing. The chemists at Harvard who mixed powders in a lab could not have foreseen the full extent of the horror they were unleashing. Their invention traveled from the test tubes of Cambridge to the jungles of Vietnam and left a trail of fire across the globe. It is a reminder that innovation without moral consideration can lead to catastrophe. The history of science is replete with such cautionary tales. The archives of military history are filled with weapons that were once considered essential, but are now viewed with revulsion. Mustard gas and biological agents share this space with napalm. These weapons crossed a line that humanity collectively decided should not be crossed. The stigma attached to napalm effectively ended its widespread use even before legal bans were fully in place. Public opinion proved to be as powerful as any treaty or convention. The collective moral judgment of the world forced the military to abandon one of its most effective tools. In the museums of military history, canisters of napalm sit alongside muskets and swords. They are artifacts of a specific time and mindset. They tell the story of a world consumed by ideological struggle and total war. Visitors to these museums stare at the metal casings and try to imagine the inferno contained within. The silence of the museum exhibit contrasts with the roar of the flames that once terrified soldiers and civilians alike. These artifacts serve as a silent testimony to the destructive capabilities of the human race. The narrative of napalm is complex and multifaceted, involving science, politics, ethics, and war. It is not a simple story of good versus evil, but a reflection of the contradictions of the 20th century. It shows how the desire for security can lead to the creation of insecurity for others. It demonstrates how the pursuit of victory can compromise the values that are being defended. The history of this weapon forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of conflict. It challenges us to do better in the future. As the sun sets on the history of the 20th century, the fires of napalm have largely burned out. The scarred landscapes have turned green again, and the survivors have grown old. Yet the memory of the weapon persists in the collective consciousness. It serves as a dark beacon warning future generations of the consequences of unrestrained warfare. The whisper of time carries the stories of those who witnessed the flames. It is our responsibility to listen to these whispers and ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Ultimately, the legacy of napalm is a question that remains unanswered. Can humanity ever truly tame the fire of war? Or are we destined to invent new and more terrible ways to destroy one another? The chemist in his lab, the pilot in his cockpit, and the child on the road are all bound together by this sticky incendiary gel. Their stories are woven into the fabric of history. We must study this tapestry with open eyes and a heavy heart.